First of all, good morning, everyone. I'm Simona Di Micco from University of Naples Partenope. And in this presentation, I'm going to show you our paper, which involves a techno-economic analysis of an on-site hydrogen refueling station for mobility sector. Well, start from the background. You know that you always looked at the fuel cell electric vehicles diffusion is larger in these last years. But in order that we can talk about the transition to a hydrogen-based mobility, it is important to develop an infrastructure that must be able to satisfy the hydrogen demand. Obviously, if the share if the spread of the fuel cell electric vehicles become more and more great, we have to be able to refuel these vehicles. This is the reason why we need to realize hydrogen refueling stations. But now, today, there are several issues related to the realization of the hydrogen refueling stations. Consider that the main issues is obviously related to the high investment costs for realizing them. Especially when we talk about of on-site hydrogen refueling station. It means that in this case, hydrogen is produced on-site. And so consider that the technologies, when we talk about of renewable sources for producing hydrogen, we need of technologies that are so much expensive. And so it involves that currently with these technologies, and so for realizing these hydrogen refueling station, the investment costs are so high, and as a consequence, the hydrogen retail price, the hydrogen retail selling price is high. So, starting from this background, what we have done in this study, we have proposed a techno-economic analysis for an on-site hydrogen refueling station in which green hydrogen is produced on-site by means of an electrolysis unit integrated with a grid-connected PV plant. Well, for this station, we analyze different plant configurations that differs both in terms of hydrogen production capacity. As a matter of fact, we consider three different hydrogen production capacity. The first one, in which we consider a plant which produces about 50 kilograms per day of hydrogen. A second one in which we consider to produce 100 kilograms per day of hydrogen, and the last one in which we consider to produce 200 kilograms per day of hydrogen. But besides the different hydrogen production capacity, we analyzed also several plant configurations which differ in terms of electricity mix. What does it mean? It means that we consider different sharing of electricity supplied between the grid and the PV plant. Well, for each one of these configurations, we carried out also an economic evaluation by assessing the levelized cost of hydrogen. Start from the hydrogen refueling station itself. Well, in this slide, you can see the scheme, the layout of the proposed on-site hydrogen refueling station. Look at together. Consider that the hydrogen production occurs in this component. There is an electrolysis unit that is fed both by the grid and PV plant. As I said in the previous slide, we considered several management strategies which involves the annual electricity share between the grid and the PV plant for feeding the electrolysis unit in order that the hydrogen production can occur. Well, when hydrogen is produced, it is compressed in order to reach the operating condition to be used as to be used for refueling the fuel cell electric vehicles. But before entering in the fuel cell electric vehicles, obviously after the compression, it is stored. The hydrogen needs to be cooled, and then it is dispensed to the fuel cell electric vehicle. Look at this. I will give you more information about this process in the next slides, okay? Well, as I say before, for this plant, we consider different configurations, which differs both in terms of plant size, that in terms of electricity mix. In this table, you can see summarized all the information I have given it to you until now. So you can see the micro, the small, and the medium hydrogen refueling station, which means 50 kilograms per day, 100 kilograms per day, 200 kilograms per day. And for each one of these plant sites, we analyzed 4 energy supply management strategies, which involved what involved this management strategy. This strategy involved the annual electric share from PV and grid that has to be given to the electrolysis unit for producing hydrogen. The first management strategy we consider is named full grid. In this case, it means that the PV does not operate, and so we consider that the all electric energy needed for hydrogen production comes from the grid. So we're talking about 100% full grid. In the second case, we consider a high grid. It means that in this case, we consider that part of the annual electricity comes from the PV, but only a small quantity, 25%, since the 75% comes from the grid. The mid-grid, which is the strategy in which we have an equal share of annual electricity between the PV and the grid, and at least the low grid, in which we have a low penetration of electricity from grid, but the high content is given by the PV, the 75% in particular. Okay, once defined the strategy, I just want to show you the component we have selected for realizing this hydrogen refueling station, starting from the main component, which is the electrolysis unit, thanks to which it is possible to produce hydrogen. Okay, well, for this analysis, we consider an alkaline electrolysis unit, which is able to produce 50 kilograms per day with an output power of 180 kilowatts. So, basing on this module specification and consider all the hydrogen production capacity for the small and the medium hydrogen refueling station, we consider 2 modules of this electrolysis unit and 4 modules of this unit respectively. Consider that the hydrogen from electrolysis unit is available at a pressure of 10 bar. But you know that the hydrogen is used in the fuel cell electric vehicles at a high pressure. We are talking about 700 bars. So we need a compression phase, thanks to which it is possible to compress hydrogen from 10 bar to 120 bar. We have a higher pressure with respect to the operating pressure of the fuel cell electric vehicles, since we have to consider obviously the last years. For this plant, we have considered a cascade system in which we compress hydrogen, and we have storage tanks disposed in cascade. So we fill, first of all, the low pressure tank, then the medium pressure tank, and then the high pressure tank. According to the plant size, we consider a compressor unit of 73 kilowatt, 146 kilowatt, and 292 kilowatt for micro, small, and medium hydrogen refueling station, respectively. Okay, as I said, when I showed to you the layout of the plant, once hydrogen is compressed and stored, it is needed to be cooled. It is needed to be cooled. Why? Because the hydrogen is a gas which shows an inverse Joule-Thomson coefficient. What does it mean? It means that during the expansion phase, the hydrogen temperatures less to increase. So, in order to assure the safety of the tank on board the vehicle, it is needed that the temperature of hydrogen has to be in a certain range, and it is not exceed the 85 Celsius degree. This is the reasons why, for safety condition and according to the protocol SEA J2601, the hydrogen has to be pre-cooled to minus 40 Celsius degree in order that we can assure the safety condition for the tank on board the fuel cell electric vehicles. Here you can see all the assumptions we have done. In particular, we have considered 1 dispenser for the micro hydrogen refueling station, 2 dispensers for the small and medium hydrogen refueling station. The fueling time is 5 minutes, and which we consider that the onboard average storage capacity is 5 kilograms. For for cooling hydrogen to this temperature, we need a refrigerator unit of 5, 10, and 20 kilowatt for micro, small, and medium hydrogen refilling systems, respectively. Skip up to the PV plant, where for this analysis, we consider a 250 watt peak power monocrystalline unit. In this figure, you can see the monthly electric production of the PV plant, and according to this monthly electric production and according to the size of the PV power plant we have selected once defined the strategy from electricity share between PV and grid, we have considered the annual electric production. Look at this table in particular. This table allows you to understand for each sides of hydrogen refueling station and for each electricity mix, what is the contribution in terms of annual electricity which comes from the grid, what is the contribution in terms of electricity which comes from the PV, and also the PV sites for each one of these configurations. Why? The first question is this one. Why we have considered this electric management supply strategy? Why we have a share of electricity between the grid and PV? The answer is simple. Because the PV, being a renewable sources, it shows an intermittent behavior. And so when the PV is not able to produce enough electricity to satisfy the electrolysis unit, the grid compensates with this electricity deficit. On the other hand, when the electricity from the PV is higher and it is enough for satisfying the requirement for the electrolysis unit, and we have an excess, we can divert this electricity excess to the grid. Over a year, this electricity excess is equal to the electricity deficit. Thus, if from an energetic point of view, this deficit and this excess are balanced, it is not true from an economic point of view, because we have a different price in purchasing electricity and a different remuneration price for selling it. Well, once defined the technical characteristics of the different configuration for the proposed on-site hydrogen refueling stations, we assessed the economic performance of this plant by defining the capex, such as the capital expenditure, the opex, such as the operational expenditure, as well as the replacement expenditure. And at the end, we evaluated the levelized cost of hydrogen, which is the more important indicator among the economic evaluation index, since it allows to understand what is the cost for producing hydrogen by considering all the computation costs, from the capital expenditure to the operational expenditure to the replacement cost, and so on. Here you can see the main assumption in terms of cost. For example, the capital cost for the PV, the electricity purchase price for and the remuneration for electricity, and so on. But skip up to the levelized cost of hydrogen calculation. Well, sorry. The LCOH is calculated as the ratio between the total costs and the hydrogen annual production. In particular, the total costs are defined as the annualized investment cost, the annualized replacement cost, the operating and maintenance costs, and we have considered also the revenue which comes from the sold of the electricity excess from PV. How we have analyzed the investment cost as well as the replacement cost? We have analyzed this cost by considering this factor, the CRF factor, which takes into account the N, which is the lifetime of the plant we assumed equal to 20 years, and the nominal interest rate E, which is assumed equal to 3%. So the analyzed investment cost is calculated with this relation, as well as the replacement, the analyzed replacement cost. Just an information about this term, this T, which refers to the time in which the replacement is needed, because you have to consider that some components during the lifetime of the plant wearing out, so it is needed to replace them. the revenue for selling electricity is calculated by considering obviously the quantity, so the electricity we have to divert it to the grid, multiplying it for the remuneration price of electricity. Get back to results and discussion. In this figure, you can see the results in terms of levelized cost of hydrogen for the micro, small, and medium hydrogen refilling station for each energy supply management strategy. You can see that the size of the plant has a significant value in influence, a significant influence. Why? Because from micro to medium, we have a reduction in LCOH of about 20%. The best configuration is reached for the medium hydrogen refilling station. We have a mid-grid energy supply strategy, so 50% from PV and 50% from grid. In this case, we have 9.29 euro per kilogram as LCOH. While the worst case is given for the micro hydrogen refilling station, in which we consider that all the electricity needed from the electrolysis unit comes from the grid. In this case, we obtained the levelized cost of hydrogen of about 12.5 euro per kilogram. But we have seen together in previous slides that the levelized cost of hydrogen is calculated by computing the operating and maintenance cost, the investment cost, and the replacement cost. So look together for each one of these cases, what is the great incidence for each case of each one of these cost items on the levelized cost of hydrogen. From this figure, you can see that the cost items, which has a great incidence in each case, is represented by the operating and maintenance costs. Why? Why? The reason is the following, because the operating and maintenance cost includes the cost for purchasing electricity. And so, since we are considered that this hydrogen refilling station is to be installed in south of Italy, so we are talking about in Italy, we have considered the electricity price from the Italy market. But these results suggest that if we consider the same analysis in different countries, in particular in countries in which the electricity price is lower, we can have a reduction in the levelized cost of hydrogen. Okay, the best configuration we have reached, as I said before, is the medium hydrogen refilling station in which we have as an electricity management strategy the 50%. So 50% of electricity from PV, 50% of electricity from grid. For this configuration, considering that the cost items which has the great incidence on LCOH is the operating and maintenance cost, look together. What are the components which involves to have this operating and maintenance cost so high? In this figure, you can see what are the section which affects the operating and maintenance cost for the best solution we have obtained. In particular, as you can see, the high incidence is given by the hydrogen production section. We are talking about of 74%. And this result is due to the fact that we have considered energy consuming technology as if we want to reduce this value, we can consider technologies which have more efficient technologies. For example, PEM-based electrolyzers, which involves a lower consumption of electricity. So we can affirm that for this analysis from economic point of view, we reached the best configuration with an LCOH of 9.29 euro per kilogram, with a hydrogen refilling station of 200 kilograms per day, and 50% of electricity comes from grid and 50% from PV. Obviously, this value is current with the state of art, but it is high compared with the current hydrogen selling price. Consider that in Bolzano, the only hydrogen refilling station present in Italy, the hydrogen is currently sold at 11.3 euro per kilogram. In this purpose, in a recent paper we have published in Energy Conversion and Management, here you can see the reference of this paper. Hope you can read it with passion and with curiosity. We have evaluated the initiative strategy for assuring the economic sustainability of this on-site hydrogen refilling station. This strategy is based on the economic valorization of the CO2 emissions that can be avoided by adopting this hydrogen pathway compared to the gasoline one. Okay, in which way we have conducted this analysis? First of all, we have calculated the CO2 emissions that can be avoided with the hydrogen pathway in comparison with the gasoline one by applying the well-to-wheel analysis. And then we valorized from an economic point of view these avoided emissions by applying the life cycle cost analysis. Here you can see in this figure the well-to-wheel for the gasoline pathway from the oil well drilling operation until its utilization in the vehicle. And we compared it one with the well-to-wheel related to the hydrogen supply chain. Obviously, you know that when we use hydrogen in the fuel cell electric vehicles, so we don't have emission of CO2, but along the entire supply chain of hydrogen, we have CO2 emission, especially if we consider the electricity from grid. Consider that I won't repeat it again. The hydrogen refueling station we are considering in this analysis is the same we have seen at the beginning. And so the hydrogen refueling station we have analyzed together, but considering this capacity, so 200 kilogram per day, and the share of electricity for filling the electrolysis unit, which is 50% from grid and 50% from PV plant. Here you can see the results of well-to-wheel analysis. In particular, if you look at this figure, you can see that just from in terms of gram for CO2 per kilometer, the gasoline pathway has a higher value if compared with the hydrogen. But what we have done in this well-to-wheel analysis, we started from the capacity of our hydrogen refilling station, which is 200 kilogram per day, and it means 73 tons per year. And we consider that this hydrogen is able for covering a distance of 7.3 million of kilometers. For this, in this condition, we consider that during 1 year, the emissions of CO2 related to this hydrogen pathway amounts to 950 tons. For the same kilometers and the same vehicle usage condition, the gasoline pathway involves 1,270 tons of CO2. So, in this analysis, we can affirm that the hydrogen pathway allows to have a reduction of CO2 emission of about 33.8%, so to avoiding an amount of CO2 of about 320 tons per year. So, once obtaining this value, we applied the life cycle cost analysis for valorizing this amount of CO2 avoided from an economic point of view in order to reduce the life cost of hydrogen we have obtained at the beginning, to reduce the discounted payback period, which is for the configuration we have seen until now, 11.5 years, and to increase the profitability index, which is 1.66. In which way we have performed life cycle cost analysis? We tried to calculate the incentive for this quantity, this amount of CO2, by fixing two different discounted payback period. The first one is 10 years, and then the second one is 8 years. In the first case, so if we want to return on investment in a period of 10 years, we need an incentive of 65 euro per ton of CO2, of avoided CO2. If we want to return on investment after 8 years, we have to return on investment, we need an incentive of 327 euro per ton of avoided CO2. What does it mean? What does this value mean? These values mean that according to assuming the lifetime of 20 years, we need, if we want to return on investment of after 10 years, we need that about the 30% of the total capital investment has to be co-founded. If we want to return on investment after 8 years, we need a co-found of about 63%. But these values are not so strange. think that for the realization of the hydrogen refueling station in Bolzano, about the 50% of the capital investment was co-funded by public financing. Okay, assuming these incentives at the end, we were able also to calculate the new levelized cost of hydrogen, which decreases with a discounted payback period of 10 years to €9 per kilogram, with a discounted payback period of 8 years to €7.8 per kilogram. Obviously, the profitability index increases from 2.12 in the case of 8 years and 1.75 in the case of 10 years. Okay, in conclusion, what we can do? We can do that according to the stringent condition for reducing the CO2 emission, the energy transition is needed. Hydrogen can allow us to perform this transition, especially if we want to use hydrogen in the mobility sector. For doing it, we have to develop the hydrogen refueling infrastructure for assuring the refueling, obviously. What we have done in this paper is to consider to perform a techno-economic analysis of an on-site hydrogen refueling station. For it, we calculated the best levelized cost of hydrogen equal to 9.29, and in order to reduce this value, we proposed an incentive strategy which involves to consider the amounts of CO2 we can avoid by adopting the hydrogen pathway with respect to the gasoline one. We calculated this avoided CO2 amount applying the well-to-wheel analysis and valorized it by applying a life cycle cost analysis. We calculated two different incentives for returning on the investment after a period of 10 years and 8 years, and we were able, so at the end, to calculate the new levelized cost of hydrogen values, which decreases to €9 per kilogram and €7.86 per kilogram, respectively. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope I'm in time.